Hello, everybody, and welcome to my spoiler review of Zack Snyder's Justice League, aka the Snyder Cut. I did my non-spoiler review a couple days ago on Wednesday, right before the movie came out. So if you haven't seen the movie and you're looking for just a regular review that doesn't really give much away, you can check that review out now. Go watch the movie. It'll take you about half a day, but you can go watch the movie, come back, and we'll talk about the movie here because this is going into all of the nitty-gritty, all of the spoilers, all of the big reveals that the movie had in store. It was a movie that I liked very much. I enjoyed going back to it as I was prepping for this review and reliving the things that I liked. There are a couple of flaws with the movie, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but this is largely going to be about what I really, really loved about this cut of the movie, because there was a lot that I liked, especially when you compare it, but not only when you compare it to the version that we got in 2017. That was the hybrid version between the stuff that Zack Snyder did and the stuff that Joss Whedon did. Let's jump right into it. We're going to be going into it part by part, and I'm just going to point out some things, some changes that I liked and some other things that I thought were really cool. But one thing I want to talk about real quick was the aspect ratio, the framing of the film, because it's something that has caused a lot of discussion. There was already some discussion with the trailers and stuff. It wasn't something that I really got the first time when we saw the first trailer, cut of this trailer back at the DC Fandom event last year. It is an odd choice. It's an interesting choice, but I think there's some things that people don't exactly get. Yes, there are black bars to the sides of the screen because it was shot at 1.33 to 1, which is called Academy ratio. It's not IMAX ratio, which is a mistake I made when I was trying to explain this on Twitter. IMAX ratio is slightly different. IMAX ratio is 1.43 to 1. The basic difference and the reasoning behind this, and if you know this already, I'm sorry, I know this has been explained ad nauseum in different places, but I also wanted to mention it in my review, was I'm not saying that it's for everybody. And honestly, this it also doesn't mean that this is exactly what you would have seen. Let's say we live in a universe where Zack Snyder stayed in control of this movie from beginning to end and shot the whole movie in this aspect ratio. That also doesn't mean that you would have gone to a theater and seen it the way that it's shown on HBO Max. What probably would have happened is IMAX theaters would have shown it in the 1.43 to 1 ratio, so you would have had it on a big screen. You would have had stuff off to the side. It'd be less noticeable because you're at an IMAX screen and it's huge and not your television screen. But then probably for normal theaters, for standard theaters, you would have had something closer to what Joss Whedon and the creative team did with the actual Justice League theatrical version, which was they took Zack Snyder's frames and then the stuff that he shot, what you're seeing in the existing 2017 version of Justice League is the frame that he shot but zoomed in. So you can see that you lose some of the information at the top of the frame, you lose some of the information at the bottom of the frame, and that's probably what you would have seen in a standard theater. That's what happened with Justice League in 2017 for the whole movie. I suspect if Zack Snyder had stayed at the helm when it was released back in 2017, you also would have had for standard theaters that same adjustment, and then probably it would have been released on Blu-ray, 4K, etc., the way that it is now on HBO Max. They're doing this with Batman v Superman as well. The reason I'm pointing this out and running you through it is that it's not that I'm saying you have to agree with it aesthetically, but I think there's a conception out there that you're seeing less of the frame because Zack Snyder made some kind of crazy decision to shoot it like an old TV show, which is not exactly what it did. It is in the same ratio technically, this 4:3 square frame, but he actually shot that intentionally to get more of the height, to be able to show these imposing figures on a big IMAX screen. The intention was never for it to premiere on HBO Max, and Zack Snyder has said before that he looks forward to the days when you can have a big wide release of this movie in IMAX. Maybe that'll be down the road a few months from now. I'm not defending his decision necessarily because I can honestly see it both ways. I think a lot of these images are stunning, the way that Snyder has composed them in this 4:3. I think some of them have a little too much headspace because you have to plan for it potentially to be adjusted if you're going onto a smaller screen. So I could see it both ways. But really, I just wanted to talk about the intentionality of it, the reasoning behind it, and the fact that, for everyone that's saying like, well, I want the version where you see more of the picture. Well, when you zoom in to be a full widescreen picture, you're actually seeing less of the picture. You see the most picture in this 4:3. You can like it, you can not like it, but I just wanted to kind of get the factual reasoning behind all of that out. So without further ado, let's go into what I really liked about this cut. And, there's some things that overlap with the version that we got in 2017. There's some new stuff, and I found that I generally liked almost everything better at least in some form, in this cut than I did in the 2017 cut. Or maybe it was about equivalent. There were a lot of trade-offs, and I'll talk about them, where I'll say like, well, you know what, I liked this better from the 2017 version, but I liked this more, so it's worth the trade-off. But the thing that we really open on is this direct tie-in to Batman v Superman. We see Superman screaming this scream echoing around the world. This sequence may have gone on a tad too long, but what I do like, number one, is that you have this direct connection. You're basically picking up this movie from where Batman v Superman left off, and it ties even more closely the consequences of Superman's death, because you see this sonic event, this world event, and I like that you're going around the world and you see people noticing that it's happening. You go to Atlantis, you go to the Themyscira. The first act, I would have to say, or I should say the first part, most of it, or a lot of it, is repeat stuff from the version, the 2017 version, but with different stuff added. You have the recruitment scene with Batman and Aquaman. The one thing I will say about this scene is the singing was a little much. I get the intention behind it, and I think if it had been half the length, but especially for so early in the cut, the fact that you have so much of that singing and the looking out and the sweater sniffing, etc. Again, it's not. I'm not gonna get hung up on it. Although I did think it was kind of funny as they were showing this long approach sequences. Bruce Wayne is riding up to the cliff overlooking where he's gonna find Aquaman, and it's a bit protracted. And I thought, well, it'd be kind of funny if the Snyder Cut was this for 2 hours, just like Bruce Wayne traveling in real time to meet Aquaman for 2 hours, and then the rest of the movie is just the cut that came out in 2017. That would be a very cruel prank, but also, I have to admit, a pretty funny one too. Following this, we get the first restored scene that I actually liked and got me the first of many times saying like, why did you cut this out? Which is the Alfred and Bruce scene where Bruce is coming back from failing to recruit Aquaman, and Alfred has that great line, maybe a guy who broods in a cave alone isn't cut out to be a recruiter, which is a great kind of pithy line from Alfred. And Jeremy Irons in general, we'll get to who I think suffered the most from the omissions that were made in this movie, but I think that the character of Alfred and his interactions with the other characters in this movie suffered amongst the most of all the cuts, because I love the interplay between Ben Affleck and Jeremy Irons, how they have this Bruce Wayne and Alfred relationship. It was almost all of it excised from this movie, and I think that it's so great to have this restored and back intact, because they have this, it's not so much a subservient relationship, it's collegial. I mean, they're almost peers, they're almost equals, and I love how they interact with each other, and it was great to see that restored and back in this version, because every time that Jeremy Irons had a scene with somebody, I came out of that scene saying like, oh wow, I really like that scene. I wish they'd kept that in the movie. We also see a little bit of Lois Lane and the fact that she has established this routine of pretty much every day since Superman died / Clark Kent for her, of going to the remnants of the statue, memorializing him. She buys coffee for the cop who stands guard. This is going to play into the movie later, but what I like here is that they're already putting the seeds in your head for later on down the movie that Lois, number one, has her own independent storyline, and number two, it establishes why she's there later on in the movie, which if you don't have this scene, the fact that she's there later on really doesn't make a lot of sense, or it seems like a huge coincidence. So I think it's smart early in the movie to establish this thing that Lois Lane has a daily routine where she's in this specific spot, because that's going to be important later on in the movie. We have the Wonder Woman terrorist scene, which is pretty much the same in tone, or at least the same in consequence to what we saw in the theatrical version. As I'm going to say this a lot, I thought the scene was a lot cooler in this version. First of all, you have the part that did not make the 2017 version, where she kind of in real time is deflecting the bullets with her bracelets, which I thought was a really cool shot to see, not in slow motion. They do make her a killer, and this is the thing with Zack Snyder's. He has no compunction about making his superheroes killers, and she's throwing people into the walls. I mean, they're dead. They're obviously, their heads are crushed against the wall. It's one of those things that I just have to, I've said my piece about it many times. It's something that I just have to make peace with. So it's something that I'm not the biggest fan of, but it's something that I will sort of allow in favor of the other stuff in this cut, because there are actually two things that I really love that followed right after that. The first is when she's throwing the case up in the air with the bomb. In the 2017 version, she just throws it through the roof. I loved the shot of her jumping up, and then you have the case up here, you have Diana here in the air, and this is another good example of Snyder wanting to use that 1.33 to 1 4:3 frame, and I think that's just a really striking image and a better image than we got in the theatrical version. And then there was something that it was, again, the second thing that I'm looking at, I'm like, why would you cut this? Is she saves the day, she apparently vaporizes Roose Bolton, then she talks to one of the little girls and she calls her princess. She says, "Are you okay, princess?" And the little girl says, "Okay, can I be like you when I grow up?" And she says, "You can be anything you want to be." And it's such a great interaction, and it shows such a humanity. I don't know why you cut this, and it's part of a trend, and we'll get into it later in the movie as we're collecting more and more evidence, but this is another one of these head-scratching things of just like, it's such a sweet little moment, and why would you cut that out of the movie? And then we have the first appearance of Steppenwolf. I think that the Steppenwolf character design is better in this than it was in the 2017 version. I think you can tell when you look at the Steppenwolf character from 2017 that once they had jettisoned Darkseid as the villain, it seems to me like there was a note from somewhere that said, well, you got to make him look more human. You got to make him look more like a person. Even if you don't change the look of him, I think this is a better look for either version. From there, we go to part 2, which is the Age of Heroes. There was some character setup right at the top here between Victor and Silas Stone. It's a small scene, but it establishes this antipathy between them, this idea when Cyborg says, you know a lot about monsters, especially how to make them. And this is going to be important because with all of the enhanced character development that you have for Cyborg in this movie, you have to establish this very uneasy relationship that he has with his father right off the bat. We also have right after this a really good character scene, and this was an appearance from a character who was not in the 2017 theatrical version, which is Willem Dafoe's Vulko. You can tell they hadn't quite gotten the wardrobe and the looks for everyone quite yet before the Aquaman movie was to come out. But I think this was great setup for the Aquaman movie. Vulko telling Arthur that you can't turn your back on the world forever, telling him to take up the trident, to live up to his responsibility. These are good character beats, and you had an opportunity to establish these beats on film prior to the Aquaman solo movie. And these are like character defining traits for Aquaman at the beginning of that film. So it's a little puzzling to me, again, why you would not take the opportunity to set this up, but they ultimately didn't because these things were cut. You also have the first scene with Desaad, who is sort of the secretary, if you will, for Darkseid, or at least, he's the guy that screens his calls. And this is the thing also where I talk about Steppenwolf, and I think there were a lot of improvements made with Steppenwolf. This establishes who Steppenwolf is and why he's doing what he's doing. And I love the fact that I think one of the reasons that he didn't work in the theatrical cut of this movie was that he just seemed like a nothing. He seemed like just a guy, just some dude. Why is he worthy of the entire Justice League taking him on? And here, that turns out like that's kind of his character trait. He is just a guy. He's just a dude. He's on the outs with Darkseid. He's been going around the galaxies, turning over planets, tens of thousands of planets, paying off this debt. But he really just wants Darkseid to notice him. He wants to get back into his good graces. He's desperate. He's a very sad thing. And that's what I like is you finally give me some insight into who is this guy and why is he doing what he's doing. So then we have this flashback, and this was present in the theatrical cut where Diana's telling the story about the Age of Heroes, and the first battle between, in the theatrical cut, it is Steppenwolf. In this cut, it is Darkseid. It makes way more sense in this cut for it to be Darkseid, because Darkseid is like the ultimate big bad in the universe. I know he's not quite the Darkseid that we will come to know at this time. He's kind of proto-Darkseid. You see more of it in this version of the movie, and this was another thing where the taste that we got in the theatrical version was nice, but this actually felt like the epic battle scene that decided the fate of the world. You also have this idea of Ares. This antagonist from Wonder Woman actually saved the world. He jumps in, he chops Darkseid in the neck with the axe. He's the guy that turns the course of the battle. You get more with the lantern that shows up, and it's not just a fleeting thing with the ring flying away. It's a bit more of a featured moment. You get a little bit more of every single army that's involved in the battle when you give it some room to breathe. I liked it in the theatrical version. I loved it in this version. Then we move on to part 3, which which is called Beloved Mother, Beloved Son. Of all of the different parts of this movie, this one and part 6, I think, are my favorites. But this one has my favorite additions to it. First of all, the big addition of the scene with Barry Allen where he meets Iris West. When he decides to save her, when he first moves into super speed, you see him run out of his shoes. I thought that's a little fun thing that just is a small indicator of just how powerful he is. I got a big laugh out of him grabbing the hot dog. I thought it was funny. I've seen online some people thought it was weird, or some people thought it didn't fit the tone of the scene. I thought it was really good. I thought he was grabbing it because the Flash is always hungry. You know, the super speed, the metabolism is going so fast, he's going to want a snack later. Turns out he wanted to feed it to the dog, and I like the fake out where the shopkeeper's like, where did he go? And he's over there with the dog, so he has to do the kind of Clark Kent thing, like, oh, what happened? Where did I go? Is everybody okay? It sounds like Kiersey Clemons is going to be back for the Flash movie, so I'm curious, like, what do you do? Do you write a new introduction to them? Do you just use this footage? I don't really know the legality of using footage from a different director's movie. I liked this sequence. I thought it was visualized really well. I got a good laugh out of it. And then we have what I think is one of the biggest highlights of the whole movie. And this in general was the stuff that I did not understand the most as far as what was cut out of the film. Cyborg. He's the best thing in the movie for me. By far. Basically, the whole setup to his past, his character arc, he was an all-star athlete. His mom is his biggest champion. We see that he has this huge football game. He scores the winning touchdown. It cuts to the stands. His dad's not there, and they have this discussion about the fact that his dad is never there. So this antipathy between Victor and Silas is established to have happened before this accident even occurred. Then there's the car accident that kills his mom. It cuts to him in the hospital. He's hooked up to machines in the hospital. This is a great acting moment from Joe Morton. Joe Morton was great as Silas Stone, who again was a pretty nothing character in every other version of this movie. I loved this moment from him where he's looking at his son and he decides to, revive him. This is the other thing that I love, because you're establishing both the weight of Victor's powers and who he is inside, and it tells you all you need to know about the character of Cyborg. And I don't mean like the characters in the movie character. I mean like his character, his morality. If it involves technology, you can do whatever you want. You could launch every ICBM in the world at the snap of a finger. And the quote that he says roughly, he says, "The challenge will be not doing it. It is the burden of this responsibility that will define who you are and who you choose to be." And it's the idea that Victor's essentially a god. He can destroy the earth if he wants to, or he can choose to use his power for good. And you have this great scene where he's monitoring this waitress who's struggling. She's working, she's getting evicted, she doesn't have any money, and he uses his power to help her. And that scene where she's at the ATM and she sees that she's gotten this $100,000 that she's won in a contest, and she's so excited, and you cut to this shot of Cyborg smiling. Just in that 2 or 3 minutes there, I immediately knew who this guy was. I knew who this character was. I liked this character. I was rooting for this character, but I could also understand why he was so conflicted, why he was in such turmoil. They did in one, I think, 10-minute sequence more than the entirety of the movie, the previous Justice League movie, had done for Cyborg. And this, more than anything, this is when I really started to realize how much in this movie I was going to look at and be like, how do you look at this and decide that you're going to cut this? Like, because this isn't necessarily story stuff. Like, when you remove Darkseid and you put Steppenwolf in as the main villain, yes, there's going to be some stuff that you have to get rid of because it doesn't fit anymore. How does establishing how and why one of the protagonists of your movie is a likable person something that should be cut? Nominally, I thought that they were still wanting to make Cyborg movies, or at least a Cyborg movie down the road, or more Justice League movies featuring Cyborg down the road. So it seems like you would want to like this character. You'd want to exit the movie liking the character in much the way that audiences left Batman v Superman liking Wonder Woman. She wasn't the star of that film, but you at least gave her enough to do in that movie that after the movie was over, people said, I really liked Wonder Woman. And then they showed up in droves to her solo film. Why would you pass up the opportunity with Cyborg to do the same thing? This was so crazy to me, and we'll go back and like I said, I've got some theories that I'll share later, but this was the first major sequence where I just couldn't understand, because this was so head and shoulders above almost anything that actually existed in the 2017 version, new or original. This was just a really standout sequence, and it's made me sad that we may not see any more of Ray Fisher as Cyborg, because just this one part of the movie made me really like him as a character. We also have a repeat of a scene that's in the 2017 version, but it works better here because it's established more, and there are a couple of extra beats, which is when Steppenwolf shows up and takes the mother box that's being guarded by Atlantis. First of all, I love the addition of the scene which shows that Steppenwolf and the parademons are literally going down into the ocean and dragging Atlanteans out of the water and throwing them onto the land. And then I also like the idea that the interrogation is this machine that like invades your mind and does a hollow projection, and this is how Steppenwolf found the mother box that was in Atlantis. You see this process. You see him actually doing the work and doing the job of finding all of these different things. So I thought that was a great addition. And then you have this scene, and it's a repeat, but where Mira is down there with some Atlantean guards. She's helping to guard the mother box. Steppenwolf shows up and takes it. Steppenwolf has Mira, against this wall, and she uses her abilities to draw water out of Steppenwolf's body, but then starts to draw the blood out. I just, some people might say this is grimdark or gritty. I just thought it was cool. And then when Aquaman does show up, he's got a much cooler entrance where he comes and stops, and the blade, comes right up close on his face. It's an extra added beat, but it works better. And in general, this is something that works with a lot of these repeat scenes. Even though this is essentially the same thing that happens in the 2017 version, you've expanded it, you've added a little more information, you've added a couple of extra beats, and the scene works better. Two things I am glad they did get rid of, though. Number one was Mira's British accent, which did not work for me in any way, shape, or form in this movie, and I'm very glad they got rid of it for Aquaman. The second thing being, I'm glad that they got rid of this conceit that in order to speak underwater that you had to make an air bubble, like physically make an air bubble for you to talk to each other. If I'm willing to accept the fact that Atlantis exists and it's underwater, I will also accept the fact that they can speak to each other underwater. So I'm glad they got rid of that idea as well. Part 4 is called Change Machine, and it starts out with a lot of what we've seen in the 2017 cut, with going to Stryker's Island and saving the hostages, including Cyborg's dad. There were a couple of alternate things that were in there. Number one, I liked the idea that we see them learning to work together as a unit, and I think at one point Flash even says, like, we're not working together, this idea that they're still struggling and how to not just be fighting for each other. You had a great beat I really liked where the debris is falling down and Flash just kind of encircles them and stops them, vaporizes that debris. And then you also have this little scene here, this little interaction, but it adds a lot, where Silas looks at Victor and says, I wasn't sure you'd come. And he just says, you're my father. And they give a bit of a nod, and he says, go. It shows that there is at least some sort of an understanding that is emerging between these two, that they're not just going to be butting heads for the rest of the movie. It's a tiny little moment, but I think it adds up in the end. Aquaman, I liked his entrance more in this version when he's coming in to save them from the Gotham Harbor, which is flooding in, which is he comes in through the crack and you see him through this wall of water. You just sort of see his face. In the theatrical version, he just sort of jumps out of the water and stops it. 5 to 10 seconds. It just added a cool little beat for me. And then we get to the whole part about the anti-life equation. And when there were leaks, even before I think there was an actual Snyder Cut, when there was talk about what Snyder's movies would have been if they'd continued, and they brought in the anti-life equation, I rolled my eyes a little bit because it sounds a little over the top. The anti-life equation. It's a MacGuffin in a way. It's the thing that will allow you to rule the world. They don't get too far into the nitty-gritty or too far into the mythology of it. It basically just needs to establish a reason, even more so, for Darkseid to want to come to the Earth. It does bring up the plot hole of, if he knew that the anti-life equation was on the world that fought back, how exactly did he forget what world that was? Because you'd think that somebody might have, dropped a pen or something after they were like, well, we've conquered tens of thousands of worlds. There's one that beat us, but we, you know what, we're just going to leave and we'll find it later. It's kind of like trying to remember where you parked your car, and then there's trillions of planets and you're like, well, shit, I don't know where I parked the world that has the anti-life equation. You'd think that maybe somebody would have kept track of it. It's one of those kind of annoying things. I wish they could have written around it a little bit more, but it's a conceit that I will grant, although I do wish that they come up with a little bit of a cleaner solution. But this is also the part when Steppenwolf realizes that the anti-life equation is on Earth and he contacts Darkseid for the first time. Again, when you talk about making Steppenwolf a more appealing character, the way that he cowers before him, he is just, he's this imposing guy on Earth, but he really is just a minion of Darkseid. And I liked how they played that scene and that interplay between these two characters. Even this scene where Steppenwolf talks to Darkseid, even if you rewrite the rest of Justice League, why wouldn't you keep this scene in? Because you don't really see Darkseid. He's part of this kind of metal thing where he's communicating, etc. Wouldn't you want to establish his character and establish the fact that he's out there instead of just name dropping him? It makes me wonder, like, how committed were they to actually making more of these movies? Because this is another thing I think that you would have kept in either case in order to continue advancing the storyline. And it makes sense to bring Darkseid not corporeally into this movie, but just as a face, basically on a monitor. What do you have to lose, especially when you already have this footage? Then we have an alternate version of the scene where the Justice League decides to revive Superman using the mother box. It had to be reshot because, surprise, surprise, they ditched, again, Cyborg's role in this whole process, which was to tell the story of the mother box, that it was recovered by Nazis, that the Allies brought it back, that it was this artifact, and then that his father was studying it as he was studying the crashed Kryptonian ship. And then when Victor was essentially killed, he uses it to revive him. And this was a very, RoboCop type body horror, as Cyborg is going back into his own past and he sees himself just basically half a torso just hung up, and this mother box reconstructing what's left of him. And is he machine or is he human? This is a question that haunts him, and you see why with this process, because there doesn't look to be much human left in him. Victor's experience with the mother box is also what inspires them to decide to do the same thing with Superman, because he basically says, look, I was essentially dead, and this thing restructured matter. It built a body for me. It revived me. Wouldn't it be the thing to have the kind of energy to bring back Superman? And this is so much more organic than the way they get to it in the movie. So by restructuring it this way, you, number one, kind of have to take a longer way around to figuring out how you're going to go to Superman. And number two, again, you cut a key component of Cyborg's backstory, and you cut even more of him out of the movie. Part of the reason why I think this was, and there are reports that came out back in 2017, I think in the kind of aftermath / autopsy of what happened with Justice League, which is that there was apparently a mandate or an edict that was sent down from the then CEO of Warner, Kevin Tsujihara, who had since resigned for various reasons, that the movie come in at 2 hours. And that, reportedly it said like the studio felt that one of the reasons that Batman v Superman didn't do so well was that it was too long and people thought it was too bloated. The problem with Batman v Superman for myself and for a lot of people, especially when you go back to 2017 when this was all happening, wasn't that it was too long. It's that I didn't think that the story was necessarily very well told. You can't just say like, well, Justice League will be a great movie if we just cut it down to 2 hours, because what they did with this is they cut good story out of a movie. And by having this mandate to keep it down at 2 hours, they cut out all of this great stuff that I think audiences would have loved. And I can almost promise you, even if you keep us in a universe where Joss Whedon takes over, if you put 25 minutes of some of this stuff, particularly the Cyborg stuff, into the Joss Whedon version of this movie, I think people like that movie better. Or at least they come out of it feeling better about a lot of the characters. It's the most base level of thinking, and yet you see this with executives so many times that just think that they can boil down what the success of a movie is to something as simple as it was too long. The length of the movie doesn't matter. It's what's in the movie. And they cut great stuff out of a movie to try to get it down to an arbitrary running time. It's maddening. It's infuriating that billion-dollar decisions are made based on these pointless metrics. And it just goes to show you that studio executives don't necessarily know what makes a good movie. They're trying to make guesses about what makes the most money. That's why a creative executive is the ideal format. Not a guy who came from the theme parks division that was a money guy, a financial guy who's up at the CEO now. A producer who knows how to write story, who knows what story is, who can back a 2-hour movie, who can back a 4-hour movie, who backs the right version of the movie. Okay, Dan stance over. Let's move on to another, well, I guess not, because I'm going to go on about this scene as well. This was the scene between Martha and Lois, and it was replaced in the 2017 version by the thirsty reporter scene. Oh, he said you were the thirstiest reporter you'd ever seen. Ha 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 ha. Oh, what a story, Mark. This version of the scene, so much better. First of all, you get the basic information out anyway. The idea that Martha lost the farm, she and Lois are still basically mother and daughter-in-law, even though Clark is gone, and they're going to remain that way. But then you have this beautiful speech from Martha saying that the world is mourning a symbol. I see all around the world, people are talking about my son like they knew him. They don't know him. They don't know the person that he was. I know the person that he was, but you know what? I can't tell anybody that. It's a secret that the world can never know. And you, Lois, are the only other person in the world that can share this pain and that knows this secret. It's such a great human conversation between these two characters. Let's ignore the tag to this scene for right now. We'll talk about that in a second. Even if you don't do that, why do you ditch this version of the scene? Because it doesn't change anything story-wise in any way, other than the fact that the scene in the 17 version was at the Daily Planet. This scene is at Lois's apartment, but it's so much better written, and it's so much deeper, and it feels so much real and more human, and you don't have that stupid thirsty reporter joke in it. But okay, let's talk about the tag to the scene, which is Martha leaves, and then she reveals that it is not Martha, that it is in fact John Johns, Martian Manhunter, also known as General Swanwick. The first time I was watching the movie, because it was the last thing I was expecting. My mind was blown. My jaw dropped. I couldn't really believe that. As I'm revisiting it, I do have to say, if I'm going to make the Murrell cut of the Snyder Cut, I would not reveal that Martha is Martian Manhunter. I think it does undercut the impact of that scene because I just love the fact that these two characters would have this talk. So I understand why you would cut Martian Manhunter out, at least at this point. You don't want to reveal him. You're not sure about the casting. For whatever reason, I can understand that. The thing that confuses me again is why you have such a deep conversation between these two characters that you essentially decide to keep, at least in context, but then decide to write a much more surface level and stupider version of. Doesn't make any sense to me, but whatever. Let's move on. And moving on to part 5, it's called All the King's Horses. It starts at the first version of the graveyard scene where Flash and Cyborg are digging up Superman's grave. Again, this is the same thing that we saw in the 2017 version, only they shot a worse version of it. In this version, the Snyder version, we have the two of them talking. Flash basically saying Superman was my hero. I like the fact that they both acknowledge the fact that they could just do this in a couple seconds, but that he is worth doing this essentially the long way around. To do it using their powers would almost seem cheap. That they need to show that they have the respect for him. You replace that in the 2017 version with them still digging up the corpse, but then you have the weird fist bump joke, and then he's like, oh, racially charged. What? Stupid, dumb joke, and you're replacing a better version of the same scene that still existed. So add that to my what the hell list, because I don't get it. Then we have another Bruce Alfred scene. It's sort of a mirror scene to what was happening in Batman v Superman.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty.
Alfred is sort of talking Bruce out of, or trying to talk Bruce out of, hunting down Superman.
He is not our enemy.
Here he's saying why he shouldn't bring him back, and you've almost reversed the character roles here. Bruce essentially tells him, you know what, I'm working on faith. For once in my life, I'm working on faith. I'm not working on reason. It was a great scene between these two characters. So, of course, they cut it, and it didn't make the 2017 cut. It's back here. I like this scene better. Then we have the scene where they revive Superman. First of all, and tell me if this sounds familiar, they cut a huge portion of backstory / character development out from Cyborg from this sequence. So we have Silas Stone mixed up here. After Cyborg fakes a biohazard to evacuate the lab, Silas sees what they're doing. He kind of gives him a nod, gives him the okay. There's a mutual feeling of respect. He trusts his son here. So it goes to show again that these two have a grudging respect for each other, or at least that Victor is starting to have a grudging respect toward his father. And then we have Lois. In the 2017 version, Lois was the big guns. Lois was Bruce's backup plan. If all the superheroes didn't work, then bring in the big guns and Lois will defuse Superman. She's used as a means to an end. Here, we've established why she's in that vicinity. She's going back to work. She's decided she is going to move on with her life. We get that little pregnancy test thing, which is a not so subtle hint to where they would have been going in future films. But Lois is not used as a pawn in this game, or is not recruited as, this thing to be used as a way to manipulate Superman. She's just there. And it makes sense why she's there, because we've got the setup for it. Superman is revived. We have a beat that I like where Lois is leaving. She turns around to look and she sees Clark floating above the site from a distance. And I thought that was really well shot. The battle that follows is mostly what we got in the 2017 version. The stuff that I liked the best was in this version. So I'm assuming this was Snyder stuff. There's a laugh moment, and I think it works, where he side-eyes Flash, and Flash has this look like, oh my God, how can this guy see me? I thought that was a great moment in both versions. I'm glad that it was there. The military military attacks here. This was the end of this really is what is reshot. So in the 2017 version, he's about to kill Batman. He says, do you bleed? You could tell that it was a reshot because he had the weird cartoon mouth kind of thing. It was a little bit better than it was at the beginning, but you still have the cartoon mouth thing. Here you have Superman ripping through the Justice League. He's blasting Batman with heat vision. Superman's about to incinerate Batman, and Lois runs in on her own. Lois makes the decision to run in and interrupt. And again, when you look at the rewrites, she's rewritten to be more of a pawn or more of a tool of Batman, whereas in this movie, she's her own person. And I don't understand how the rewrite makes things simpler by making things more complicated. We'll put a pin in that. We'll go back to that later. It ends on a laugh line, and a laugh line that makes sense, which is Aquaman kind of pointing to the Flash and Flash saying, like, I am so sorry. And I think that could be referencing to a couple things. Number one, the fact that Superman threw Flash into him and knocked him into the stairs. The other one being that it was sort of Flash's idea to revive Superman in the first place, and Aquaman's just like, what the hell did you do, man? That laugh works. It works in the context of the movie. I like it way better than the joke that was in the 17 cut with the, something's definitely broken, which is so out of context for Batman. Just didn't make sense with his character. Again, you cut a good joke and a good scene for a worse joke and a worse scene. Then you have the thing I was referring to with Cyborg, where in the theatrical cut, the mother box gets blown out of the building and lands in the parking lot, and then they just look over and they're like, oh man, he got the thing. Well, now what are we going to do? And they look a little incompetent. Here, the mother box lands in the parking lot. Silas Stone grabs it. He takes it back inside into Star Labs. Of course, Steppenwolf shows up to come claim it. Silas climbs into this chamber. Victor shows up, so he's able to watch. And then Silas shoots this particle beam or whatever at the box. He sacrifices himself. He gives his life in order to help the heroes save the world. And first of all, this is a great beat for Silas. This is a great character beat for Silas. Number two, it's a great character beat for Victor because he lost his mother. He thought that he'd already lost his father, but he was finally getting to a point where they were sort of able to have this respect for each other. And then he loses his father. It adds to the tragic backstory. It gives him motivation to go and win this fight. It's a story beat that makes sense as to why they're able to find this box so quickly that they have to rewrite around in the 2017 version and invent a new reason for how they could get to where they're going. And when you add all of this stuff up, the fact that the Lois Lane storyline and being rewritten, all of the excision of Cyborg stuff, when you look at what was changed and what was cut from this movie, there's a bit of a trend that starts popping up. You have character moments and development from Wonder Woman. You have agency and storylines from Lois Lane. You have the entire backstory for Victor Stone and Cyborg. You have other characters that were excised completely. And in almost every case, these characters happen to be women and people of color. And look, I don't jump to these conversations lightly because I know this is a very charged topic. These are very charged issues. And I know sometimes these things are simplified when they're much more complex and vice versa. But what I will say is that to me, it shows one of two things is happening here. Number one is that those characters were chosen specifically to have their stuff cut out of the movie, which is very problematic idea. The fact that these characters were kind of targeted individually to have their stuff cut out. But the other thing, and I think in my mind, perhaps the more likely thing, and this is kind of a broader view thing, it seems like perhaps it was an unconscious choice in the sense that these characters were deemed by somebody, and I don't know who, as more worthy of being cut. As if their stuff was more cuttable. But at the same time, we're going to add all of this stuff for these other characters. Flash drawing silly nose and mustache on the guy at the jail. You have all that stuff with the Russian family. At the power plant. I mean, that's several minutes worth of stuff. We're talking about a critical studio mandated 2-hour deadline. We are in an age where I think it's important to ask these questions. I'm not saying anyone should be fired or pilloried or anything like that. I'm not even saying that it was necessarily anything that was intentionally meant to slight anyone or to do harm, but the questions should be asked. And I think that's what the whole point of asking these questions is trying to figure out, if you can't figure out what your reason is, then ask yourself what that reason is. And then maybe down the line, we can work toward a more equitable solution for everybody. So that's another Dan stance gone. Let's move on to part 6, which is something darker, the big action finale of the film. This also has what I think maybe my favorite new line from the movie when Batman says, I don't care how many demons he's fought and how many hells, he's never fought us, not us united. Love it. That's just such a great mission statement. Ultimate faith in this team. It is a transformational arc. It strengthens Batman's character arc from Batman v Superman to this movie. So of course they cut it. Then we have Superman. He's gone back to the Kryptonian ship. We have, I think some of this has to have been new voiceover. Some of it is recycled lines. We hear Kevin Costner's voice. We hear Russell Crowe's voice. But towards the end, I don't remember these lines ever showing up before. And it feels like they're speaking to him after he's gone through this ordeal. Jonathan Kent saying, "You need to show them who you are," which I thought was great because that was the opposite of what Jonathan Kent saw in life. He told Clark that maybe he had to hide who he is, but now that he's made this sacrifice and Clark has this second chance, I love that he's got his Earth father saying like, "No, this is the time to show the world who you are." Then you have Jor-El saying, "Love them, Cal, as we did you." And again, this is Jor-El's whole message about humanity, was that they need a guiding light. I liked this new voiceover from his two dads, and basically the fact that this experience now has brought him full circle with them, and he hears their voices now in unity, not conflicting, but united, saying, "Be who you are, be the hero you were meant to be, show them who you are," and that propels him to go and have this big showdown. We have the big action finale, a lot of the same beats, although it doesn't have that pukey, muddy looking red, which is great. You have a really cool Justice League group shot, kind of an Avengers type shot, if you will, only because they did it first. And then Superman's entrance into this scene. I liked where his character was at the end of Justice League, but I'll sacrifice it for the cool Superman stuff that we get here. Steppenwolf bringing down the axe, and it just like stops on Superman's shoulder, and he says, "Not impressed," and then the blowing of the super breath that freezes it. That's a great Superman entrance. I'll take it over what we got. They're pretty close, but I'll take it over what we got in the 2017 version. But then we also have something that to me topped it, which is the Unity happens. And there's an explosion that basically kills everybody, kills all of our heroes, and the Flash kind of puts his hands up, and now we're delivering on this thing that he's been sort of inching toward the whole movie, which is the ultimate use of his powers. And this is my favorite part of this new cut. This is one of my favorite superhero things ever in a movie. This sequence where Flash is tapping into the Speed Force. He's going to run faster than the speed of light. He's going to break all of his rules. He's going to save everybody. He's going to save the world. The music, first of all, Junkie XL's score was fantastic. I love this piece of music. I don't know if they're selling the soundtrack yet, but if anything, I'm going to buy that specific track. I love how it's visualized. I love that the ground is materializing under his feet as he essentially rebuilds the world. Everything about this scene is great. Top 10 superhero moment ever in a movie for me. How they cut this in favor of Dostoevsky, I don't understand. Again, this is something that you could have kept everything else in the other version, but you still could have kept this and you would have had a great Flash scene, a really awesome scene. And yet they cut it for like the lamest stuff. Anyway, I love it so much. Flash turning back time. And then you have another shocker cut Cyborg scene that's great, where he's stopping the Unity, and it sort of gives him another vision, and it's him and his mom and his dad, and basically saying like, "Hey, just let it happen. We're going to be reunited. You're going to be put back together." He looks at his mom and his dad and himself as he remembers it before he was Cyborg, when he says, "I'm not broken and I'm not alone." If you're writing what a character arc is, that is from the beginning of this movie to the end of this movie for Cyborg, that is a perfect character arc. They cut a absolutely textbook arc for Cyborg. Not only textbook, but great. So they cut that moment. I was very sad to see that go. Aquaman stabs Steppenwolf. I've seen some people say like, "Oh man, they really destroy Steppenwolf." I mean, how many people did Steppenwolf kill? Aquaman gets Steppenwolf from behind. Superman punches him through the boom tube into Apocalypse. I like that Wonder Woman's just like, "Well, you're not getting out of here unscathed." She thinks at this point that Steppenwolf may have killed her mom, because he says that he did. So, Diana's out for vengeance. She cuts his head off. Darkseid just puts his foot on top of Steppenwolf. This is where this character belonged. He was always a minion. His death is not a big deal. Darkseid doesn't even really care about it. I think that that's the perfect way for him to end. That's why you needed a bigger bad in this movie than what we got. And I love this moment where they're basically staring each other down. They're looking at the future. Darkseid's looking at the Justice League. The Justice League is looking at Darkseid, and they're basically saying like, "Bring it. We're here. We're waiting for you." And then we have a couple great shots of the Justice League united, similar to what we got in the 2017 version, but not exactly the same. And then we have the epilogue, A Father Twice Over. And I'm mixed on this because I love the part that actually kind of goes to the characters in this movie. You have Victor listening to Silas saying, I brought you into this world and back to it. You can't imagine how proud I am of you. You see the fact that he is happy now, finally, with who he is and his identity as Cyborg. Barry's dad is super happy that he was able to get a job. I love the shot of Barry, running down with his flash run, but just that smile on his face. He's now fully realized his potential. So we've left Cyborg and Barry in better places. And then you have the final reveal, Superman opening his shirt. This was the blue and red and yellow uniform in the Whedon cut. It's the black uniform in the Snyder cut, but it's the same basic concept. And then we have just some kind of chopped scenes, some scenes that don't really have a place. First of all, we've got a revisit of the Luthor escaping from Arkham. He's on the yacht. Deathstroke shows up. Their meeting goes on basically the way that it was. Only this time, Luthor reveals Batman's secret identity and says oh, he's Bruce Wayne. And then they have a little toast. Then we've got the nightmare sequence. This was what Zack Snyder reshot specifically for this cut. You're on Earth. Darkseid is invaded. Superman is hunting everybody. You have Batman's hunting party. Cyborg, Mira, Flash, Deathstroke. They're all together, trying to do what they can. And then we've got the introduction of Joker, and he and Batman have a conversation. And I know that a lot of people love this scene. It's not my favorite, if I'm being honest. I didn't come out of it really liking Jared Leto's Joker any more than I did before. It's just not for me. His take on the character is not for me. And then we have one final scene, which is Bruce wakes up from his nightmare and Martian Manhunter shows up and basically says, hey, crazy stuff's about to go down. There's a war coming. I'm here to help. And Bruce says, cool. All right, I'll see you around. And so now Martian Manhunter is part of the group. He flies away, and that's the end of the movie. That's where I would have, like I said, I didn't mind the Manhunter reveal. It really did catch me by surprise at the end of that Martha Lois scene. But because he comes back in this part, I would cut that reveal from earlier in the movie and just have this scene. But, that's my own fan edit. This is the Snyder Cut, and he can put in what he wants to. So those are the things I loved about the movie. It's been a long conversation, but there's a lot that I liked. And my non-spoiler review was probably shorter than I wanted it to be just because I didn't want to go into all of this stuff. But on whole, and when I look at the Snyder Cut in general, yes, there are some things that I have qualms about. When I read, if these stories are true about what his sequels would have been, they don't make me jump out of my seat. But then again, those aren't finished movies. Those are concepts. Who knows how many more iterations they would have gone through. I would say on balance, 90% of the stuff that was in this cut was stuff that I reacted positively to, that I thought was either a great addition or a superior version of what we already had. 10% of it was stuff that I was kind of like, I'm not so sure about that. There was very little that I didn't like, but there are a few things that I just flat out didn't like. But in general, I'm really happy with this cut of the movie. And I said this in the non-spoiler review. I think this is the definitively superior version of the film. It's not like an alternate version of the film like the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2, which I've always thought was kind of a companion piece to the Richard Lester cut, but couldn't really replace it because it was stitched together from the best that they could do at the time. I think that Richard Donner's version of the movie, if he had made it back in 1978, 79, 80, would have been superior to what we got. Here we essentially get the leveled up version of that, where the director Zack Snyder did have the capability to go back, to reshoot what he wanted, to retool what he wanted, and deliver the version of the film that he would have delivered X number of years ago. Now, it's not the version that probably would have hit screens because I doubt that WB would have put a 4-hour movie out, but I think it's pretty close to that, and it honestly may have even gotten a little bit better if you cut 15, 20 minutes out of it. I don't know. I don't know what that version of the movie looks like. But this surprised the hell out of me. When this was announced, I wasn't sure what this was going to be. I said that I would walk into it with a curious and open mind. This exceeded all of my expectations and then some. It really is, I think, one of the best DC movies that's ever been made. And I don't say that lightly. And it just goes to show, and a lot of people say, when I'm talking about movies, I say that I wish every movie was good. I'm so happy that we live in a universe where I liked this movie, because this would not have been nearly as fun if I didn't like the movie. That's why I go into every single movie wanting to love it, because it is many times, 9 times out of 10, so much more fun to love a movie and talk about what you love. I love the fact that I love this movie, and whether you love the movie or didn't love the movie, I love the fact that it is now not a theoretical, that it actually exists. What did you think about Zack Snyder's Justice League? Did you enjoy this? I was going to say this was about as long as the movie itself, but no, you could run the raw footage for this like 2.5 times and it still wouldn't be. But thanks for bearing with me as I went over the stuff that was added that I really liked. If you want to see even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. I've also got stuff coming out this week upcoming. I've got a review of the film Nobody, which hits theaters on Friday. I also have reviews coming up for Godzilla vs. Kong, another movie that I can't wait to see. And there are movies that are getting added to the release schedule. We're getting back into the groove of things. Movies are starting to come out again. It's been a very long year, and we're coming up on a year since I started this channel in about a month, but also just been a very long year for everybody. And it just feels refreshing to get back into the swing of things. And I love that one of the first really big projects that's come out to start having this conversation has been this movie, a movie that I liked way more than I possibly could have expected to. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Stay safe, and I will be back very soon.